Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 74 of Fracking Nightmare. Now, last week we were blessed with the presence of Vera Scroggins, the outstanding campaigner from Pennsylvania. And of course, Vera talked about the challenges that she's had by being effectively barred from over 300 square kilometers of Pennsylvania. And also the challenges that she's facing with the industry doing its level best to get her to shut up. But Vera, being the veteran campaigner that she is simply determined even more to spread the word about this insidious unconventional gas industry. And recently, she has hosted a number of visitors. Not least, she was hosting Kevin Hollinrake, the MP for North Yorkshire. Now, it has to be said that Kevin Hollinrake is a newcomer to Westminster. So, being a relative newcomer, of course, he can be forgiven for thinking that as an MP, he actually has any influence at all. And I think that Kevin Hollinrake has, unfortunately, learned the hard way that in reality, it doesn't matter what he says, really, that the industry will do whatever it's agreed with the relevant government department. So here is Kevin Hollinrake in Pennsylvania at the back end of September. And he was so moved by his visit that within a few days of coming back, he made this observation. He said that I would like to see any fracking activity a mile away from homes and schools. Well, of course, unfortunately, he seems to have forgotten the script because the well that Third Energy are desperately trying to get permission to frack is located in Kirkby Misperton, and it is, in fact, the entire village of Kirkby Misperton is not only within 1 mile, but also Yorkshire's largest revenue tourist attraction is inside the 1 mile limit. So Kevin Hollinrake suddenly backtracked, having had the facts of life pointed out to him, and simply said that he wouldn't stand in the way of the unconventional gas industry in North Yorkshire. So having made himself irrelevant to the debate, then of course it is beholden upon the local population to do its own research. And so literally a couple of weeks or so after Kevin Hollinrake was in Pennsylvania, he was followed by Joe and Steve White, residents of Rydale. Now, although Joe and Steve are active members of Frack Free Rydale, they went over to Pennsylvania in the hope that just maybe they got it all wrong and that just maybe their fears were ill-founded and just maybe they could actually get on with their lives. Well, it's with great pleasure that I welcome Joe and Steve to join me this evening. So, Joe and Steve. Hiya.
Hi. Hi.
Well, thank you so much for coming on this evening. And now I know you were in Pennsylvania for a week, and Vera actually shared with us last week that you spent 9 hours with her compared to Kevin Hollinrake's 90 minutes. But in my intro, you probably heard I just said that I think you went over there in the hope that just maybe you'd got it all wrong. But 6 days or 5 days, in your opinion, was that enough to really get a good insight as to what's occurring in Pennsylvania?
I think so. I mean, obviously, we concentrated on Susquehanna County and the Pittsburgh area. And we spent so much time traveling, talking to people, meeting people, and so on, that the whole week was really dedicated to that. Every second of it, we were taking in information and chatting to people. So whilst it's a huge industry and it's a huge country, I think we got a really good feeling for what fracking would be like if it comes to Rydale.
Okay, well, let's put it on the map here. This is the map. This is Pennsylvania. And as you can see, Pennsylvania borders New York. This is upstate New York here. And this is New York City, New York. And here's Susquehanna County in Pennsylvania. So it's pretty rural, isn't it, out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of similar, probably 50% bigger than Rydale, I would say, with less population. So Rydale's probably about twice as densely populated. As you can see, well, as you'll see from maybe some of the pictures, it's actually very, very wooded and hilly. So it kind of looks, I think as we were driving through, we felt it looked more like kind of the lower Alpine area, Bavaria, Austria, places of around the French Alps. So not high mountains, but kind of low Alpine feel to it. So not very similar to Rydale.
We couldn't see the direct comparisons that Mr. Hollingray made. It didn't feel like Rydale or North Yorkshire to us at all.
It certainly, I'm sure it felt as though it had much greater expanse.
Yeah. Huge.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, as I'm sure you've experienced, I mean, you can drive for hours and actually not see any sign of human life, which is certainly not the case in, well, anywhere in this country. So now, talk us through your trip. You went out to meet with Vera. Was that one of your first ports of call?
Yeah, we met Vera on the day after we landed, pretty much. We spent a whole day driving up to Montrose, which is the sort of county seat of Susquehanna County. And we met Vera the very next day at 10 in the morning. And that's where we started the tour. Went to all sorts of various places, didn't we?
Well, let's actually, we've got a couple of pieces of video, short video that you've shared with me. And in this first video, it was your trip out to a well site and also to a compressor station. And I think the key element of this video is the noise levels. So let's just take a look at this video, and then you can share your experience with us.
That's huge, isn't it?
There's a bigger one. The plant in Houston is bigger.
So now Vera, of course, had to be very careful how close she got to the well site because of the restrictions upon her. So how far away from that well site, which was actively drilling, I believe it was actually drilling a lateral section, but how far away were you when you were filming?
Oh, went right up to the gates of the well site. So, I mean, there's a couple of things that it's worth pointing out. First of all, it was actually quite hard to find an active well site because we know at the same time Kevin went across, the amount of drilling and the amount of activity has really declined from the peak. So there's a lot less going on than there was previously. And the second point, looking at the compressor station, and it's something that hadn't occurred to me before we went out there, just how much it's not just the frac pads that you worry about, it's all the ancillary equipment. It's the pipelines in between the frac pads, it's the compressor stations in between the fracking pads. You've got dehydration units, you've got the cracking plants and refineries and so on. So there's an awful lot there apart from just the frac pads.
And the nearest house, which I think was part of your question, Ian, was literally just across from the main gate. We bumped into the guy who was one of, I think it was either lease owner or something, and he lived further away, of course. He lived slightly further away, and he was very pleased because they were going to be putting 3 wells on that site, which meant 3 times the money. But there were a lot of people in the area who may not have been benefiting, or perhaps they were getting a lot less, if anything at all. And they were very, very close. I mean, we're talking, what would you say,
Couple
Steve?
of yards,
couple
maybe.
of 100 yards, 200 yards maybe from the front of the gates to the fracking pad.
And the noise level was such, I mean, I'm guessing, but that sounded sort of well into the 80, 90 dB levels, maybe even more.
Yeah, it was very loud, very, very loud.
I mean, could you actually hear yourself speak above that noise?
You could hear yourself speak, but it was really, really loud, and goodness knows what it's like when you're living with it 24 hours a day and at night. I mean, it was really noisy, really noisy.
You could hold a conversation, but you wouldn't want to stay there too long.
No, you were shouting.
Yeah.
You were talking loudly, and it was, it's a bit like when you go into maybe a really noisy place and you end up getting a sore throat because you're shouting over noise and your ears start to hurt. It's that kind of situation. Yes, you can talk, but you have to really raise your voice, and it must be absolutely horrendous when it's there 24/7.
Yeah, and hey, just to pick it up, your point, Steve, on the activity, I've got this graph. This is actually from the show I did 3 weeks ago, where I was looking at the decline in rig activity in all of the shale basins around the US. And here's where you were. You were up in Pennsylvania in the Marcellus Shale. And this is what's happened to the rig count. So, I mean, the rig count is now around about 45. And at the peak, it was about 140 or so. So it's about a third, or even just a bit under a third of what it was at its peak. But the production actually is on the increase. So whether that's the wells that are coming on the stream are tapping into some rich seams or whatever, but of course this really supports what's occurring with the phenomenal surplus of not just gas but oil, all hydrocarbons. In fact, right now there is a phenomenal surplus, which of course is what's driving the great drop in the price. But anyway, so come back to your trip. So Vera took you around some locations. Oh, you also, I think she took you to the high points, didn't she? I mean, I think this is a high point vent, isn't it?
Well, I think we'll bow to your knowledge there, but these sort of things appear all over the side of the road. They're putting in loads and loads of pipe work through neighbourhoods and at the side of the roads, and I think these things link up to all that pipe work that they're putting in and infrastructure. But this was a really common sight.
Was there any venting going on that you could hear when you stopped by these?
Not from that site, no.
Okay.
I mean, these are just things we spotted on the way in, but certainly from people's properties, which you might see later, there were methane vents there that were venting.
Yeah. And we also, at the big gas plant that you showed, which is only earlier on the end of the video, that's about half a mile from a school, and they were flaring from that.
Yeah.
That was being flared whilst we were filming.
Yeah, because I mean, in Pennsylvania, well, not just Pennsylvania, right across the US, initially there was no zoning at all, and I mean, certainly in Texas, around Dallas and Fort Worth, they were literally drilling right up alongside schools and right in the middle of housing estates. I mean, there was no respect for private property at all. Now, you also met with Andy, who showed you, what he's had to do in terms of his water supply, because he's had his water supply contaminated. Of course, many people in Pennsylvania, they get their water direct from the aquifers. And once the aquifer is contaminated, of course, then the water is no longer usable. So let's just have a look at this short video, and so we see Vera in the background as well here. But this short video of Andy and his basement bladder.
This is water that we use for washing clothes, for showers, for toilets, but
Not drinking.
Not drinking.
but not drinking or not cooking. It's just the drinking and other. We need to have gallon jugs of water on our sinks in order to use that for brushing your teeth.
And you've had that for 4
We
years.
have a house that has very little saleable value because who's going to buy it without water?
Yeah.
or who's going to buy it without a good source of water.
Yeah.
So you're stuck.
Wow.
You're just one casualty in the whole environment which is supported politically. The last governor we had in Pennsylvania was, basically from my point of view, anything the gas companies wanted, they got.
So that's even when the DEP approved or stated that your water has been polluted by Cabo. You still have to go through all that.
Mm-hmm. Now, the gas company did get a letter from Pennsylvania DEP, which pretty much put the blame on them in the casing, and they had everything identified.
Yeah.
They did carbon testing, and the results of the carbon dating testing verified that the gas that was in the water here was the same gas that they were getting out of the well.
It's what they call thermogenic rather than biogenic.
A more recent type.
Documents.
Yeah.
You still have to fight to get any kind of compensation. And what are you actually fighting for in court? Are you fighting for compensation for the value of your home?
The value of the decrease in resale value, and then for inconvenience, disruption to our daily lives and that area. Pretty much you can't, unless you can prove that there was health damage, that the water has created a health issue, then you can't get anything for health related.
So now, do you think you're going to be covered for at least maybe that 90,000 and more in the settlements?
I really don't want to get into that because we may end up with a gag order. I'm not sure what, so I don't want to get into any discussion on it.
Okay. Thank you.
So that's Andy, and looking at talking about his water supply. So house water, i.e. Generic household usage coming from the bladder. But as he said, you can't drink the water, and I think he said you can't wash in it or wash up in it. So Andy's been having to use alternatives to his underground water supply for how long now?
4 years. 4 years, Ian.
4 years. 4 years. Yeah. And as he intimated there, he's trying to sell his property. But reading between the lines of what he was saying, I mean, I think he'd pretty much acknowledged that the only people likely to buy it was effectively the gas company.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, all those people who think this is exaggerated and made up, and you can't set the water on fire and all this, they need to go and speak to these people, because if anything, it's underrepresented. This gentleman is the he's retired, former superintendent of educational superintendent of Susquehanna County. And so he was like the director of education, in charge of all the schools. And he's worked hard all his life, retired. He bought that land. He had that house built, his dream home, which is was a very valuable property. And then one of the well casings failed, and he's lived for 4 years without water. And what he told us was not only in his personal circumstances heartbreaking, but what's actually going on in America is exactly what some reports have said, that litigation isn't being recorded, partly through the gag orders, partly because a lot of people can't take the stress or don't have the money to be able to take litigation right the way through the courts. As it said there, Andy has spent $90,000 of his own money so far fighting them. And the interesting thing is that the EPA in this have absolutely categorically said that his baseline testing of his water to what he's got now, the gas companies have contaminated it, but they won't accept liability, even though they're providing him with the drinking water. The bladder water obviously is for all his washing and ablutions and things. The drinking water gets delivered in bottles. So this man is having to fight them all the way in his retirement. A lovely, really sweet guy.
And as he intimated there, there's a lot of other people who probably would have talked to you, but they're under gagging orders, which of course is exactly the same experience that I had in Australia last year, where I could only record the conversations with the Monks and the Jenkins because everybody else is locked into a gagging order.
Yeah,
Correct.
that's absolutely correct, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah.
Everybody thinks this is made up in the UK and exaggerated. It's actually really serious and extremely frightening. And these people are having to settle outside court and getting bad deals. You know, they're not getting compensated for the harm they've suffered.
Well, it's a war of attrition, isn't it? It's a war of attrition. It's like wear them down. You know, once the gas companies realise they're starting to run out of money, that's when they'll come in with the offer.
Yeah, the thing I found interesting as well, we didn't speak to these people, but there's another group of people who didn't have the money to get their own water, didn't have the money to go to litigation. This was in Washington County, south of Pittsburgh. The Mars Parents Group told us about them. So they are being supported in their water supply by a water bank run by the local church and provided by the community because they can't afford litigation, they can't afford water. And this is in the most developed nation in the world, where they can't even supply water to their own people, fresh drinking water.
Well, and I think you've got the prima facie evidence as well, because in the US, the corporation is supreme over the private citizen. And yeah, I think you came across that in Pennsylvania as well.
We did. I mean, what we heard countless people, including Andy, say, and Andy wasn't anti-industry per se. What he was against was the government, who we have more film of his interview, and what he actually says on film is that the government just doesn't care. The people are just sacrifices. You cannot trust the regulators, and basically the corporations just rule, really.
Yeah, we've had at least two people say that the governments, their local governments, national governments, were just rolling over like beagle puppies to have their tummies tickled by the corporations. It was that kind of, you know.
And that, of course, is exactly what will happen here, in particular, if the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership legislation is signed into law, because at that point, the corporations actually have supremacy over all national law. So that's why not just fracking, but there's other issues rolling in behind it that have to be addressed. But just staying with the water issue, because I want to bring attention to this picture that you sent me, which clearly spells out this is a single well pad, LaRue C P3 well pad on the Dimmock area, and the consumptive use of water is 3.575 million gallons per day on a 30-day average.
Yeah.
And this is a single well site. So that's over 30 days. So that's effectively 110 million gallons, give or take, a month from a single well site.
Yeah, it's frightening, isn't it? Absolutely frightening.
Well, and then of course, not only are they abstracting water at such a phenomenal rate, but obviously the contamination, basically once it kicks off, you can't stop it. Now we're going to take a short break, and in this break we're going to take another look at Vera Scroggins and the amazing work that she has been doing in Pennsylvania, and of course our thanks to Vera for hosting Kevin Hollingray for 90 minutes, but also for giving Joe and Steve the tour around for a whole 9 hours.
As the year end approaches, we plan to revisit some of the personalities that shaped 2014. Make sure to check out our New Year's special for the perspective of the people that made the year matter. Here's one story just to give you a taste of what's ahead. Meet Vera Scroggins, an American grandmother and anti-fracking activist who is now banned from going to shops and hospitals near her home in Pennsylvania. Here's how it happened. To raise awareness about the environmental consequences of shale gas extraction, she canvassed people in her area. That led to a court banning Vera from oil company property, which turned out to be nearly half her town. We've been following Vera's plight closely, and here's what she told us just as events were unfolding.
I will continue to do it because I live here. I don't want to live with this, and I don't want it for future generations. I don't want it for my children or anyone I know. So I'll continue to do this as long as I can.
We also caught up with Vera just ahead of the new year. Despite all her legal troubles, she said it was a good year for the anti-fracking movement, with New York's newly imposed ban fueling her optimism.
This year was especially momentous because New York finally decided to ban fracking, and I was working with New Yorkers, besides trying to ban it in my own state of Pennsylvania, and it finally happened.
Well, what about the year to come? Well, Vera isn't planning to stop her fight, even though breaking a court ban could mean fines or even jail time.
I'm still doing my tours despite the harassment, despite what Cabot has done in court. And right now, more and more citizens are protesting in Pennsylvania, don't want to have fracking. So I think 2015 is going to be a better year for anti-fracking, for closing down even the industry, which continues to rack up.
So I know you only spent 9 hours with Vera, but I think you guys would agree she's certainly one amazing lady, yeah?
Yeah, she
Absolutely,
is. Absolutely.
really,
Lovely lady.
Yeah.
Absolutely lovely grandma, giving her time to fight for what is right. She's
very positive as well.
Yeah, charming
Very positive
lady.
person, yeah.
Absolutely lovely.
And almost doing it alone now, because, I mean, this is the great sadness. Once this industry rolls into town, most people just give up. I mean, they fight it until it arrives, and we see this right around the world. I mean, it's the same with Brian Monk and the Jenkins in Australia. You know, they keep at it, like Vera keeps at it, but they're almost doing it in glorious isolation, because everybody else just takes the attitude of, oh, well, you know, what more can we do? They're here. That's the end of it. Yeah,
I mean, one of the things that I think appalled me was when we spoke to the Corrigans, and Vera kind of just, it was somebody we met on spec, just driving past their house. They had a well on neighbouring land, and although they're earning money from it, exactly what you're saying there, Ian, they were earning money but really wished fracking hadn't come. They invited Vera in, and the guy was saying to her, really admire the work you're doing, Vera, it's fantastic, really great. And when the oil company came to me and said, sign this piece of paper saying you're not allowed to have Vera Scroggins on your land, I refused. So plenty of people have signed this as part of the standard lease agreement. And she's a 64-year-old grandmother with a video camera, heaven's sake. I mean,
it's Cabot, isn't it? Cabot.
Yeah, and if you're completely happy about the operation you're running, why would you be worried about a senior citizen filming you from outside your well site? What possible harm can she do? And then you're getting her to be banned from private land. Yeah. Terrible. What's all that about?
Yeah.
Well, and you made a very good point there, of course, that Pennsylvania is not split estate. So, in other words, the landowner does actually hold the mineral rights. So, most of the landowners are actually, if the companies are being honest, which we know some of them are not because there's various legal cases underway. But the landowners do actually get, potentially, quite a significant royalty.
Yeah, that's right, Ian. I mean, it was very interesting to talk to people. And not only do they obviously get some kind of rental, money from having the pad or the infrastructure on their land, but then obviously they get a share of the royalty. And they're looking at between 12 and 21%. Which kind of puts the 1% across the whole community, to perhaps fix the roads and mow the lawns or something in Rydale, to be rather on the meagre side. Not that I think people want the money, but you can imagine, there is more incentive for people in Pennsylvania to take on board the gas companies' leases.
Money, yeah. But even in spite of that, say the day we spoke to Andy, we spoke to 4 people in total who were earning money from the gas company, and 3 out of the 4, even though they were earning money, said, we wish fracking had never come.
That's true, they did.
Yeah.
Some did it with their eyes open, some were kind of fooled into it, and there was one guy who was very happy with it and thought he was making him rich. And that's, so there are winners and losers, but...
I think one other point I'd like to make as well, Ian, is that going back to what you were saying, it's absolutely spot on, because they were telling us out of there that they're now suing these gas companies because they're not getting the royalty checks. The other thing that became very apparent was because the type curve, as they call it, is so steep with shale gas, you know how the production falls really quickly. Well, so do the royalties. And so they might start off getting a reasonable amount, but that quickly diminishes. But the weirdest thing of all we heard was that some of the landowners who hadn't read the small print and possibly hadn't employed a lawyer because of the cost of legal advice out there, they basically, not only were they not getting their royalty checks, but they were also now becoming liable for the taxes that the gas company should have been
so
paying.
They were getting bills.
Yeah, they were getting bills for a thing called wellhead tax and things. So there's a lot of unhappy bunnies out there as well at the moment, even with the leases.
Yeah, because the ones that are making money aren't making quite as much as they thought they were going to make. And of course, the problem is they've probably already spent that money. It tends to be the usual case. Now, I know that when you were out there, you also managed to actually get a trip around a facility. We won't mention the company's name, and we won't mention the individual who gave you the tour. But what was your thoughts from getting this tour of the facility? Did you come away convinced that it can be done safely?
I don't know, not really. I mean, the company itself, I mean, they were really nice people, and the guy who took us around was a very pleasant chap. But there are so many facets to this process, and so many things I think can go wrong anywhere. And one of the things they were telling us, I think, which was the strongest message, is how unpredictable shale is. He was telling us that they can drill a well, and they can drill a lateral from that well north and get gas. They can drill it from the same well south and get nothing. They've got wells that they've drilled on the same pad. Some have worked, some don't. Some work well in one area, some don't work well in another area, or initially they work well and then the gas falls. And it was very interesting because we were asking him all about Third Energy's proposals and why they were doing a vertical frac and one thing and another. And of course they have to qualify it, different geology, different circumstances, etc. But when we were asking him specifically about the 9-year production that Third Energy are going for, he just started chuckling. And he said, there's no way they can even gauge what's going to come off those. He said, these are some of our best wells here, and these wells had been producing about 50% for 4 years. And I said to him, well, how long do you think these will go on for? And he said, we've no idea. He said, they may fail tomorrow, they may be still going in 4 years' time. So it's really, shale seems to be really hit and miss. And then, they don't seem very keen on the multiple
wells per pad. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And again, whilst they said, okay, the geology might be different in the UK, I mean, do you want to explain that one, Steve?
Yeah, he was saying that his experience was if he even had more than one well per pad, it tended not to produce as well as the initial first well, almost as though the other laterals had already had their gas or oil stolen.
Yeah.
Anything over 4 or 5 wells per pad just wasn't economic. But again, maybe different shale may work differently.
Well, certainly the shale, the layer is much thinner. I mean, in Yorkshire, the average thickness of the shale is 5,000 feet right across the whole of the country. In fact, in places it's 11,000 feet thick. In others, it's not even 2. But in Pennsylvania, it's a much thinner layer. So that would explain perhaps why it is that they only have one well per pad. Whereas certainly I think in the north of England, have multiple wells might be more viable. That's of course if you had any company that knew what they were doing. But as we know, you don't.
I think another very valuable point though, that he did tell us was that he felt that the industry itself had been very badly managed because he was really worried about losing his job and things like that. They've had this campaign. I don't know if we're going to speak about it in detail later, but they ran this campaign in the US where they basically said, drill a well and bring a soldier home, which we thought was absolutely dreadful. Think of the people that have lost, loved ones in the conflicts that have happened recently. And I think they got criticised eventually, did the gas company, but not until they'd had a huge campaign about making people feeling they were doing their patriotic duty. But they've gone at this so hard that this guy from industry told us that they are overproducing gas by billions of cubic feet a day. And they are actually on that site going to be switching the gas off. They're turning the gas off because otherwise they're selling it below, economic rate. And basically they're waiting and hoping they can last out until they can start exporting the gas. So all this idea that it was all because, energy security and all for the country, they can't wait for the gas price to go back up.
Well, and here's one of the pieces of artwork. I mean, this campaign was, as you say, a national campaign. Drill a gas well, bring a soldier home. So that somewhat sort of spells out the agenda, doesn't it? So, George Bush and Donald Rumsfeld were trying to convince everybody that it wasn't about gas, wasn't about oil. And yet there's a campaign here to promote the unconventional gas industry on the basis that if you can get homegrown gas, then you don't need to initiate illegal overseas wars to protect your supply. Bit of a dichotomy there, huh?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So now, listen. Unfortunately, we're starting to run out of time, as I knew we would, because I know you had an absolutely fascinating journey. So, in summary, you to some extent followed in the footsteps of Kevin Hollinrake. I have a sense that you actually put more into the journey and that over the 7 days than he did. But what is your overriding opinion of your trip? I mean, do you feel that you can give up the campaign and because you have nothing to worry about, or did it just confirm your worst fears?
I think it's the point you made in your opening introduction, Ian, that genuinely, had we gone there and found, it's not so bad, maybe we can step back and get our lives back. That was part of the thinking, really. That's kind of something we wanted to see. And what really came out very strongly to me was that every single person we spoke to had a very strong opinion on fracking and said it had a huge impact on the area. If it had been one of these things which you could just do quietly away in a corner and not be noticed, I'd have expected to at least met some people who said, fracking, yeah, I've kind of heard about it. A bit like in Rydal at the moment, you speak to people, fracking, don't even know what it is. Everybody we spoke to, whether it was waitresses, bar owners, people on the street, shop owners, absolutely everybody knew about fracking. Everybody said it had a huge impact.
And I think people we spoke to, I mean, tourist industries had been negatively impacted. Shops had closed down. We spoke to the owners of people who were running tourist industries. And given that Susquehanna is bigger, it has less people, it has less visitors than Rydal, we came away, and it isn't going to stop you having a life, but it will impact hugely on this area. There's no two ways about it. We have smaller roads, more people. We don't have densely wooded landscape. We have open vales where you will see these wells because, Kirby Misperton, KM8, the trees have been going there 20 odd years, so you can't see them from the road. We will be impacted more than Susquehanna. And for anyone to say otherwise, I say you go out there, you talk to the people with no water, you talk to the tourist people who've lost their industry. The lady who was looking after us in a B&B, she basically told us that she's an artist and so is her husband as well, that she only opens her gallery now by appointment. She said, we lost our downtown, 4 hours of 4 years of trucks coming through every day, the tourists left. And how many shops was it, she said, closed?
Well, there were when she started 10 years ago, there were 20 other businesses there. There were just 2 of them left now.
Well, unfortunately, what you have discovered in Pennsylvania is pretty much the case wherever this industry has managed to establish a footprint. It wouldn't have mattered whether you'd have gone to Ohio, to Colorado, to Vernal, Utah, to the Eagle Ford in North Texas, down to in South Texas, the Barnett Shale in North Texas. It wouldn't matter where you went. Unfortunately, you would have pretty much encountered, I think, exactly the same. And of course, your experiences are pretty much identical to mine in Australia last year. So now, obviously, you guys, you went over there with a completely open mind. You've come back, well educated on the process. What are you going to do with it from here? Are you going to take your experiences on the road?
I think we're going to try and share what we've learned, and we want to. Ideally, I think we'd like to try and put the film clips together in some kind of film, because we'd actually like the voices of Pennsylvania to tell people what it's like. Because we spoke to people, they weren't all like Vera, who were willing to stand up. We spoke to everyday people, and of course there are people who are in favour of the industry. But the issues with it are underreported, if anything, in this country. They're not sensationalised. I'm not just talking about the health. I'm talking about lots of people who've got issues with water, the trucks, the problems. I mean, we went there, as Steve said, and as you said, when it was scaled back. And, you could see all around you what had happened, the negative impacts. And I think that people need to go into this with their eyes open. We're not part of a party that is all out for shale. We haven't got any links to the gas or oil industry. We're just people who live here and have been caught up in this, who've never campaigned in our lives for anything, who just wanted the truth. And as far as we're concerned, we've gone out there and got it from a resident's point of view. And if you want to look on a superficial level, you can drive along and you can see the beautiful landscapes and wide forested areas and everything else. But if you want to just go slightly below the surface, I mean, we were told, weren't we, by Betty, the lovely lady that looked after us in the B&B, some heartbreaking statements.
I mean, the thing that really got me, she said, it felt like her land had been stolen, and she could now really see how it had been for the American Indians. Somewhere that felt like home no longer belonged to you.
And I would even add in that Betty was not wasn't anti-industry.
No.
This is, she pointed out that the industry had given $1 million to the local hospital. But the legacy it leaves, and it does divide the community. I know certain quarters try and blame those people who are opposed to fracking and say we divide the community. Talking to people over there, no, it doesn't. The industry divides the community because it impacts, it changes, and some win and an awful lot lose.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, listen, thank you so much for sharing that with us this evening. I mean, I know there's a lot more we could talk about, and I'm sure we'll find the opportunity to do that. I have one final question to put to you. Obviously, whilst you were there, the impact on water was very much at the forefront of many of your discussions. And 18 months or so ago, Yorkshire Water expressed its concern about the potential impact of Third Energy's re-injection well on Ebbston Moor. Yet, Yorkshire Water failed to make any comment whatsoever, positive or negative, in the planning process. And in fact, one of the points made at the North Yorkshire planning meeting was that Yorkshire Water had not commented. Now, on the basis of Yorkshire Water seems to be abdicating any responsibility, and there's a distinct possibility that Yorkshire Water may not actually make any comment on the application for Third Energy's application to frack KM8. So what would your observation be, or your comment be, to Yorkshire Water's customers?
I think we're very concerned, Ian, because I think the sheer volume of water that they use, if this industry really takes hold, and let's be honest, the nature of shale is it doesn't operate on half a dozen wells. They use a tremendous amount of water. Where does all the wastewater go? If there's any problem with any of the wells or re-injection, I know it's conventional gas up at Everston Mole where they're re-injecting and things, but if things go wrong into the aquifer, the knock-on effects are massive. I mean, you know, when we went to Dimmock and we saw all these places with methane vents and people haven't had water for 8 years, you know, Rydale is a groundwater area, and people make this mistake and say, well, if you're on the municipal system, you're okay. Well, you're not, because, okay, the boreholes that the farmers and some of the more isolated farms and properties may use, yes, they are perhaps more vulnerable. But if these wells fail going through the aquifers also give the municipal water in Rydale. And if I was Yorkshire Water or any water company in the UK, and also the people who are paying Yorkshire Water for the service, I think they should be going out there and visiting some of these people, because 8 years down the line, I think we didn't mention, but there is a 9 square mile moratorium in Dimmock, and this doesn't get out into the public domain in the UK. And the reason they've got that is because, yeah, Cabot want to frack there again, but they can't because the methane levels are too high. People have been without water for 8 years where it has got into the aquifer. The water isn't safe to use and drink. And, you know, what are we doing? You know, do we want people in the UK without water? You know, this is a real risk.
Well, you know, it seems that maybe somebody does, sadly. But you're absolutely right, and you know, it is so important. I mean, thank you guys so much for taking the initiative, and I do want to make the point that you funded your own trip. You weren't offered any assistance or financial assistance anywhere. This was your own initiative, self-funded, to get an objective view of this industry. And I think people, certainly in Rydale, need to hear what you have to say. And I think we also need to find a method, whether it's through a documentary or whatever, but we need to find a way to get your experiences in Pennsylvania out to a wider audience. So thank you so much for joining me this evening. Steve and Joe, you know, you're doing an amazing job. Frack Free Rydale have done an outstanding job in raising awareness. And I know that you're not going to let up. And hopefully Third Energy will get the message and rein in their ambition to exploit unconventional gas resources in the Rydale area. So thanks very much. And I'll see you guys soon.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, all right, we're going to take a break now. And in this break, we're going to look at the video that has been produced by 38 Degrees. And this video, I think, is having a very, very significant impact on helping to raise wider awareness about the potential impact this industry will have on the Rydale area.
Rydale is a very tranquil area.
It's a beautiful rural location.
The economic prosperity of this area is based on its agriculture and tourism.
Third Energy are intending on hydraulically fracturing the KM8 well at Crawberry with the intention of producing gas for the next 9 years from that well.
In this one area, they're looking at maybe 1,000 wells.
As soon as they find gas commercially and this thing suddenly snowballs, it's not just Rydale, it all spreads through the whole of northern England.
The fracking industry has demonstrated wherever it's gone to be a heavy industrialisation of the landscape with spills, with pollution of water and air. So as a GP, I'm worried about illnesses which seem to follow fracking.
Third Energy have said that it's going to be nothing to worry about, small scale, discreet.
That's exactly what the energy companies promised us in Australia too, but that's not what they delivered. They delivered destroyed land. They've left us with a toxic chemical nightmare, and that is what the industry brings to you. They came in, they took our land, they took our lives, and they destroyed our communities.
I'm on the front lines here in America. Most of us are on water wells, and now we have 10 townships that have families with contaminated water because of nearby gas drilling.
There was no one there to clarify and actually do an investigation to find out why the kids up the road, why their noses were bleeding all the time, why the woman up the road had rashes, why people's dogs started dying. We didn't know it was the gas making us sick, but what I do know is that we weren't sick before they came.
You look at what's going on in America and they say, well, we're improving the regulation, it's all getting better. Prove it. Prove it to us. Where have we got the evidence to prove that it can be done safely or otherwise?
We don't need this industry in this area.
I'm scared, and I'm right to be scared.
Our generation has the chance to make it better for the next generation, for my kids. And I don't think our generation should steal their future. I really don't.
The people of Rydale love Rydale. We want to pass it on to our grandchildren in good order.
This is something that's worth fighting for. It's something that we need to keep, these glorious green spaces. If we despoil them, we don't get them back. That's gone forever. It's where we live, it's what we love, it's where we are, and I'm not giving it up.
Third Energy have come to the area thinking we're going to lie down. We're going to fight them all the way.
Well, as I've made the observation many times over the last few weeks, the British government has effectively launched environmental warfare on the entire north of England. And Rydale, one of the most beautiful parts of the country, on the edge of North York Moors, under attack or potential attack here by Third Energy. But, as people do educate themselves, then they very quickly realise that this is something that they don't want in their backyard or anybody else's backyard. And just a few days ago, Hull Council actually established an anti-fracking policy. And this is from the Drill or Drop website. It says, Hull City Council came a step closer to adopting a policy against fracking. The authority's Energy and Infrastructure Overview and Scrutiny Commission approved a policy on unconventional oil and gas exploration. Under the policy, the council will not encourage applications by holders of the appropriate petroleum exploration and development licence to gain access to land owned by the council for the purposes of exploring, developing or extracting for unconventional oil and gas using fracking or mini-fracking technology. Well, the number of councils around the country who are adopting anti-fracking policies is increasing almost daily. Well, meanwhile, just a few miles north of Hull, Rathlin Energy are in the process of decommissioning the well at Crawberry Hill. And I think a lot of people in East Yorkshire have been shocked by how much infrastructure is necessary to decommission a well. Now, whilst Rathlin Energy remains solvent, then of course the well will simply be classified as abandoned. But the process of abandonment requires the company to run full integrity tests to establish that the well can be safely abandoned and can be locked down without any rogue emissions. Well, the cost of abandonment is not insignificant. And literally, in the last week as well, Rathlin Energy's parent, Connaught Oil and Gas, have actually announced that they are intending to sell up their activities in Canada, which are primarily down in the southern end of Alberta, the southwest of Alberta, and extending a little bit over the border into Montana. But what they state is that they are looking to sell their oil wells and acreage, which is valued at $4.22 million. Now, $4.22 million, if that number's correct, that's literally petty cash. That's next to nothing. So in other words, the operation in Canada is basically next to worthless. So they've decided that there's not much opportunity with prices of hydrocarbons where they are right now. So they're looking to sell up in Canada and focus on their UK opportunities. Now, where have we heard that before? Well, a couple of years ago, that's exactly what Dart Energy said when they were pulling out of Australia. That they had decided that they were going to sell up in Australia, let go their licenses, and focus on their UK acreage. Well, barely a year after they made that announcement, not even. In fact, I think it was about 5 months, Dart Energy was effectively up for sale and then bought up by iGas. So let me read between the lines for you here. The reality is that Connell Oil and Gas is for sale. And the reality is that Connell Oil and Gas is hoping that some investor will buy up the acreage in the UK, and the only acreage they have is Rathlin Energy. So, who are the likely candidates to buy up this dog company, Connell Oil and Gas and Rathlin Energy? Well, let's have a look at the two suitors, the two potential suitors here. I think that's INEOS Upstream, who already have a significant interest in iGas, and also Peel Gas and Oil. So these are two new players, both private companies, so not listed on the market. I think Jim Ratcliffe holds something in the region of 70% of the entire INEOS empire. And John Whittaker also has a significant chunk in Peel Holdings, although he has a relationship, I believe, with, I think, some Saudis or some Qataris. So, which of these would I put my money on buying Rathlin Energy? Well, Jim Ratcliffe, interestingly, actually attended, although I think this is from the Daily Mail, and I don't think they can spell it right, but he actually attended Beverley High School in East Yorkshire. So, could it be that maybe Jim Ratcliffe thinks he's doing East Yorkshire a favour by buying Rathlin Energy? Well, the only way in which you're doing East Yorkshire a favour, my friend, is to buy Rathlin Energy and then put it into mothballs. So, Jim Ratcliffe has claimed he would be happy to live above a fracking well. He says the so-called problems are all myths. In America, more than 25 million people live within 1 kilometre of a shale well, and there have been no major incidents. Well, Jim, I can introduce you to a couple of people who have just taken a trip over to Pennsylvania, and maybe you should have a chat with them because their experience was somewhat different from yours. The full article is actually can be found on This Is Money, and that was published in July of this year. So I think we can safely say that Rathlin's application to go back to West Newton A, of course they have permission to establish a well site at West Newton B, but I think it's little more than a homeowner applying for permission to build an extension with very little intention of actually building the extension, but hoping that it will increase the market value. So watch this space, because I think that in the not too distant future, once the iGas stock drops, it's down around 18 pence at the moment, and I think if it drops another 3 or 4 pence, then Jim Ratcliffe might be seriously interested. Meanwhile, in South Yorkshire, at Misson, and I love this artwork. This is from the Misson Facebook page, Misson Impossible for iGas Energy. So there you are, Jim, or John, another potential investment for you there. Although, once again, the community have something to say about it, and it's not very positive. But why on earth would you really want to throw your chump change after these companies? Because the price of oil is now around $42 a barrel. It actually dipped to just over 40 the back end of last week. But even at a conservative estimate, that's still around about 30 plus bucks a barrel below the point at which there is any viability in this industry. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But I know that also all eyes are going to be on Upton. And once again, of course, this is iGas. So iGas have, as we discussed last week, iGas have managed to get a court order to evict the camp that's been on the site at Upton, about a quarter of a mile from Chester Zoo. The camp's been there for 18 months now, I think since April of 2014. And iGas have determined, obviously, that they want to get in there to start exploratory drilling. They're currently doing some seismic testing around the area. Well, I introduced this slogan last week, turn Upton into Bentley, but it could also be turn Upton into Balcombe, Barton Moss, Belcoo and Bentley all rolled into one. Because in every one of these locations, it's been the local community, along with the protection community, that have effectively kept the unconventional gas company at bay. Now today, there was a big gathering at the Upton camp, a lot of local people coming down to show their solidarity and support for the camp. There was a couple of celebrity visitors there. We have Bez from Happy Mondays, I think it was. And of course, Vivian Westwood in one of her creations there. I'm sure it's a high dollar creation. Of course, Constable 666 also put in an appearance there. And, you know, what has been occurring at Upton over the last 18 months is the education of the local community. And in fact, I think that the local community have actually extended an invitation already to Joe and Steve to come down and share their experiences in Pennsylvania so that the people of the Chester area can get some insight into what they'll be letting in. So this was Bentley, and this is, of course, this was Met Gasco in northern New South Wales in the Northern Rivers area. And there was a massive camp there of some 1,500 people. And then when the New South Wales government announced that it was going to send in 700 riot police, the group swelled to 10,000 people. At which point the New South Wales government announced that it was withdrawing Met Gasco's licence because it had failed to fulfil a key criteria of its licence, which was communicating with the local community. Exactly the same as occurred at Belcoo in County Fermanagh, where Tamron, an Australian company, were effectively run out of town by the Northern Irish Assembly, again on the basis that Tamron clearly hadn't engaged with the local community. So ultimately, it really does come down to the local community. Is this something that you want to permit in your area? The bottom line is that the British government believes that it can steamroller this industry into Tory-held communities. It's no accident that all the primary target areas are Tory-held, because they literally believe, perversely, that the local Tory community will simply pursue all appropriate legal and council challenges. But once the ultimate decision is taken, they'll simply say, oh, well, we tried, and let the trucks roll into town. Well, forgive me, but I don't think that's going to happen, especially as the level of awareness is increasing throughout the country. So, well, what can I say? Get yourselves to Upton. Upton is very much the front line. So it's from Friday, December the 4th that iGas have the opportunity to carry out an eviction. So let's make sure that that doesn't happen, or at least it doesn't happen easily. Let's make sure that iGas and the British government understand that this is not something that the community in Chester or anywhere else in the north of England is prepared to tolerate. So we have an opportunity that the people of Pennsylvania and Queensland unfortunately didn't have. We have their experiences which we can use to raise awareness in this country. And believe you me, I have every intention of doing everything I possibly can to make sure this country does not suffer a fracking nightmare. Thanks very much for joining me.